Now, so let's go back now and just take a generic sense of the cat. The components that you're dealing with. Now, first of all, I'm just going to give you a plan view of how you go about thinking about things. This is really no different than a human. So if I start with saying, okay, here's a plan view, say, of a head of a human. We have a neck. We have a rib cage, small at the top, wide as we go down. Sternum, bottom of the 10th rib. Pelvis, in our case, fairly wide. Pubic arch. And then trochanter, your legs, knees, and down. Okay, so that's the basic plan. Clavicle going out, going through, and here. Now, this is looking in front. Now, if I take this and looking at the top, primarily looking from the back now, what we have is the head. We have basically a cylinder for the neck. We have a rib cage, same thing. We have a waist, and in this case, the pelvis is really quite narrow. Through here. Now, this is sort of a rough plan view. Okay, the difference is here now. This is where you start thinking. Since we have a broad rib cage, and I'll take and draw this from the back now. Head, neck coming down, 7 cervical vertebrae, top, coming down, going through, rib cage, waist, pelvis, coming through, this way, ischotuberosity, lining up, our sacrum in here, and then we're coming out. Okay, scapula. Okay, our scapula is going out this way, going out that way. Okay, now, what is our scapula attached to? Now, here's where we have one of the major differences between animals, four-legged animals, and us. Okay, here we have scapula, which is attached to the clavicle. This whole arm section is the only thing that connects us. The only thing that connects us is that whole arm is this one joint where the clavicle comes. Nothing else. You can remove this whole thing. I know a person who has it all removed. Looks great. You can really see the rib cage. But you notice the rib cage is really small up here. Okay. Clavicle goes out. This is holding our shoulders apart. Okay. The other animals don't do that, don't have that. They have maybe a remnants of it. The cat actually does have one, but it's not attached to anything. Okay. And still, that's going to change. Front, back, doesn't matter. Is that, let's do it a 3/4. That's where we need to take and make a little more sense on this. Okay. In drawing, rib cage, narrow, going back. The scapula is taking and coming forward, down this way. So we actually end up what we consider our shoulders. On the animals, that is, the shoulders are actually in front. Here's a corner. This is your corner. Then we're going back in. The neck is still a cylinder fitting into this area here. So then the head coming through, coming forward. Okay, so you can see right away I do that. You have essentially the look of a dog. And we're talking about this angle. So what we have then is the scapula is taking and coming forward to here, and it's on the side then. It's on the side instead of Here we would be thinking the scapula in the back would be going out, like here, I've got it in the back, sticking out. Well, the cats and dogs, it's on the side. Horses, it's on the side this way. So now what this does, this creates a shape that we look for. So let's just take and look at the shape a little bit, starting with the head. Now, the head, we're talking about how the parts pull, so I'm looking first for the corners, eye sockets, going back in, volume, pulling the muzzle out, the jaw coming forward, eye planes going in, coming forward, ears in the same place. And you feel the line of the neck going back. So the cylinder, but now, as you're building this round rib cage, as you're going back in, you're dealing with a scapula that is coming forward. Now, this is really generic. This is, you can find whether we're talking goats, cats, dogs, it's all pretty much the same. Okay, so here now what we have, this becomes a box type form. That's a little narrow at the top, broader at the base that we're fitting the neck into. So we have then the rib cage, and we start going back in, and I've already been talking about the pelvis. The pelvis really now becomes a box form that's going back in. So these are the components now, but there's also the waist in between. Now here's where we need to take and expand on this a little bit more. Okay, now let's just take and go through these various parts. Okay, for instance, we're starting from the head. Now let's just take a horse, for instance. If you take the shape of a horse, you look at a horse, we see this long line coming down, and we feel like this. I got that basically it'd be hanging a little bit lower this way. This coming through, down, pick up the pelvis, coming through here, legs, and going down. Okay, this line right here. Now this is again one of those points that really is very misleading. Okay, if we take, let's look at the cat here again. This is a sort of comparison. Okay, what we have right here is, you notice the way the spines are sticking up. Well, look at the skeleton, you see exactly the same thing. Okay, it's a matter of degree here. I've talked about this nuclear ligament that's taking and pulling from the base of the skull from up here. Okay. Here, the horse's spine actually goes down like this. Come through, goes back up here until we get the tail coming out of here. Pelvis is at an angle here. All of this are the vertebrae sticking up. Okay, we have exactly the same thing. This line here is the nuclear ligament. It's like a cable holding up the spine itself. So the shape of this is coming through. The scapula, the rib cage itself is in here. Tiny at the top, broad coming down, coming through into here. Okay, we have in here the trapezius muscles, just like us, coming back, and we have a waist in here. Okay, but this line, this shape. So if I take the idea of the cat again or something, what we do is you try to feel this movement. We take and we go through. So this is the starting point. It's taking and getting a gesture. With a cat, dog, horse, doesn't matter. You're feeling the flow. You think of the flow of the movement, of the way it's going. At the same time, you're taking and visualizing the volume of the rib cage. And then as you come into the pelvis, well, at the same time, then we take and we think of the scapula coming forward, looking for the corners with this part, the withers on a horse. sticking up. So you're taking into consideration now where the spine actually is, where the back of the skull would be. We're dealing with point. You're feeling the pull. We're going over the source. Then we're coming to the waist, and we'll talk about that in a second here. You're picking up pelvis, corners of the pelvis. So as you're coming through, you're always looking. Now, when I'm drawing a human, this is exactly what I do. Same thing. Okay? Except with humans, we tend to be thinking more from the front. But in the animals, we tend to think more from the top or the side, not so much from the underside. Okay, then we think of where the bones, we start following the pattern of the way the bones go. You start to feel the shape of this is coming through. We start talking about the shape here. Okay. Here we have, this is scapula. I think this was possibly a horse. A horse would actually have a cartilage on the end here, which actually extends it. Okay, but you notice that the scale of the parts here, even more, they would maybe, this might have been something smaller, but you can even have a fairly even. For instance, in the cat, we can look at this and you can see that how almost equal on the two sides. Makes a big difference. You have this line that's in here. You have this line that's in here that you can see in the center. You got two parts that are almost equal. Okay. Again, just making the point here. You can see how narrow, how small the rib cage is in the front, and how broad it becomes. Also notice the spine now, and you can see the spine as we take and we build this thing up. And you're getting the ridge, and you notice that we have the sections here. You have the neck, you have the thoracic, you have the lumbar. Notice that all of the vertebrae are different for each one of these sections. Okay, so that makes a difference. And here in the cat, for instance, we can see that these are sort of coming forward. Well, this fragment here of a sheep that I have, practically horizontal, sticking out this way. If we had a cow here, you'd see even really more so. Horses too, very similar. So how that affects the look then is that we actually have, in this being sort of more of a dog or a cat, we actually have a sense that there's a waist in here that we fit into the rib cage, and then before we start getting into the legs. Okay, so this waist area. Okay, now we go back to what I was drawing here. So the section then here is that we have this section in here: the waist, head, neck, shoulders, scapula, pelvic area. Okay, these are your sections. So that's what I'm doing here. Now, as you can see, I'm drawing the head, the neck, fitting into the rib cage. We have the waist, and then we're dealing with the pelvis. Each of these points now have their landmarks. Again, just like humans, we're taking and dealing with these points. Okay, so these become the things that you're always looking for. And in fact, for instance, if you're studying drawing for animation, you actually have to know where these points are, because that's what you're going to have to take and animate. That's where the movement takes place. Certain things, for instance, like, okay, in a horse, this area, fairly small. If you think about it, horses do not bend at the waist. To take and move, to take and turn, they have to go with their feet, crossing over to take and turn. So the waist is very, very narrow. But a cat, you can drape it over your shoulder. Okay. They're very flexible. The cartilage is a lot more flexible. So these become the elements now that we're working with. So let's take and do a few more of these, and then we'll go through and talk a little bit more about the muscles.